They said I'd never amount to anything, that I couldn't give their daughter the life she deserved. Well, they're not saying much now, not since we got the keys to that beachfront property they drive past every summer vacation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Nathan Cooper, 35 years old, head chef at what was once a struggling neighborhood restaurant called Harvest Table in Portland, Oregon. For 8 years, I poured everything into transforming that place from a forgettable eatery into what food critics now call Portland's hidden culinary gem. Every signature dish, every seasonal menu change, every supplier relationship, I built them all from scratch. When I first met Rebecca at a farmer's market 7 years ago, I was still working 60-hour weeks for barely above minimum wage. She was finishing her master's degree in education, standing at a local honey stand, debating between wildflower and lavender. I recommended the wildflower. It paired better with the sourdough from the baker 2 stalls down. That simple conversation changed my life. Rebecca came from a different world. Her father, Richard Mason, was a successful investment banker. Her mother, Elaine, came from old money and sat on the boards of 3 different charitable foundations. Their sprawling home in the West Hills overlooked the city, while I rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a convenience store that smelled perpetually of day-old hot dogs. The first time I picked Rebecca up for a date, Richard answered the door, took one look at my 15-year-old Honda Civic, and asked if I'd come to the wrong address. When Rebecca introduced me as her date, his expression shifted from confusion to something worse, pity. That night, I took Rebecca to the restaurant where I worked after hours and cooked her a 5-course meal in the empty kitchen. "This is who I am," I told her, plating a dish I'd been perfecting for months. "I might not have much now, but I know what I'm building." 6 months into our relationship, Rebecca brought me to Sunday dinner at her parents' house. The conversation around their massive oak dining table inevitably turned to my career. "A chef," Richard repeated, swirling expensive scotch in a crystal glass. "Interesting hobby, but what's your actual career plan?" When I explained that cooking was my career, Elaine nearly choked on her wine. "Nathan," she said, putting down her glass carefully, "Rebecca has certain expectations of life, the kind that come with financial stability." She spoke as if Rebecca wasn't sitting right there, as if she was a child who couldn't make her own decisions. I remained polite and composed, explaining my goals of eventually running my own restaurant. Richard laughed, not maliciously, but with the confident dismissal of someone who believed he knew better. "The restaurant industry is a graveyard of broken dreams," he said. 90% fail in the first year. That dinner set the tone for the next 3 years. Every family event included some subtle, or not so subtle, comment about my ability to provide for Rebecca. When we announced our engagement, Elaine pulled Rebecca aside, thinking I couldn't hear. "Are you sure, darling? You know how challenging it will be." 2 weeks before our wedding, Richard invited me to lunch at his country club. The maitre d' glanced at my off-the-rack suit with barely concealed disdain as we were seated on the terrace overlooking the golf course. Richard waited until our drinks arrived before getting to his point. "Nathan, I respect your passion," he began, pronouncing the word as if it were a disease. "But I need to know how you plan to support my daughter. Real estate in Portland isn't getting any cheaper, and Rebecca has always talked about living near the coast." I explained my 5-year plan, continuing to build Harvest Table's reputation, negotiating for partnership with the owner, and eventually leveraging that experience to secure investors for my own concept. Richard nodded politely, then slid a folded check across the table. "A wedding gift," he said, "and perhaps a down payment on something sensible, something with resale value." The amount was substantial, enough to significantly change our financial situation. I folded the check and handed it back. I appreciate the gesture, Richard, but Rebecca and I will make our own way. His expression hardened, not from anger, but from genuine incomprehension. He couldn't understand refusing money. It was the first time I realized that in his own way, he did care about his daughter's well-being. He just couldn't imagine someone like me providing it. Our wedding was beautiful but tense. Rebecca's extended family treated me with polite caution. Like a stray dog, their beloved niece had inexplicably decided to adopt. I overheard Richard assuring his brother that she'll come to her senses eventually. Rebecca heard it too, squeezing my hand so hard her knuckles went white. That night, as we danced at our reception, she whispered in my ear, "I believe in you, Nathan. I always have." In that moment, I silently promised her that her faith wouldn't be misplaced. The first 3 years of our marriage were challenging. Rebecca taught at a public elementary school while I continued working at Harvest Table. We lived in a small apartment, saved aggressively, and passed on vacations and new cars. Every extra dollar went into what we called our dream fund. Our financial situation was the elephant in the room at Mason family gatherings, with Elaine regularly sending Rebecca links to job postings for me that had nothing to do with cooking. "IBM is hiring project managers," she'd say, as if it were interchangeable with my culinary career. Richard could make a call. Meanwhile, at Harvest Table, I was quietly building something. Our owner, Frank Miller, was approaching retirement age and had lost the passion for innovation that the restaurant industry demands. I approached him with proposal after proposal, introducing a farm-to-table concept, revamping the wine list, launching a Sunday brunch service. Each change increased our bookings, and soon we had waiting lists every weekend. The turning point came when a prominent food blogger featured us in a review titled "Portland's Renaissance Restaurant." Reservations doubled overnight. Frank called me into his office the following week. "I'm too old for this new energy," he said, leaning back in his creaking chair. "You've turned this place into something I barely recognize, but the numbers don't." "Lie." He pushed a folder across his desk. "My retirement offer. I'm willing to sell you 40% of the business, the rest when I fully retire in 5 years. I opened the folder, expecting a number we couldn't possibly afford. The terms were challenging but not impossible. Frank was offering owner, financing with reasonable terms. That night, I laid the proposal before Rebecca at our kitchen table. "Can we do this?" she asked, eyes wide as she reviewed the numbers. "It would mean another 2 years of tight budgets," I said. "No vacations, no new car, maybe even downsizing our apartment temporarily." She didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." A dime. When we told her parents about the opportunity, Richard immediately offered to review the deal, which was his way of looking for flaws. He returned the documents covered in red ink. "The terms are predatory," he insisted. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The valuation is inflated. You're buying a liability, not an asset." He laid out an alternative. I could join his friend's tech company in their corporate dining division. Stable hours, benefits, retirement plan, that's what Rebecca needs. I thanked him for his input, but proceeded with the deal anyway. The look of disappointment on his face wasn't directed at me. It was directed at Rebecca for choosing to support my decision. That hurt more than any criticism he'd ever leveled. At me, the next 2 years were the hardest of our lives. We moved to a studio apartment half the size of our previous place to cut expenses. Rebecca took on tutoring jobs after school hours. I worked 15-hour days, 6 days a week, stepping into every role at Harvest Table when needed. Cooking. On the line when a chef called out sick, washing dishes when the dishwasher quit, even fixing the plumbing. when we couldn't afford an emergency repair. Rebecca never complained, not once, even when she had to decline her family's annual summer trip to their rented beach house in Cannon Beach, explaining that we couldn't afford the time away. Elaine's response was to send back a check with a note. For a little relaxation. Everyone deserves a break. Rebecca returned it with a thank you note, her pride matching mine. Richard and Elaine interpreted our struggles as confirmation of their worst fears. At a family Christmas gathering, I overheard Richard telling a cousin, "They're living like college students. She could have had anything, and she chose this." The words stung, but they also fueled me. I wasn't just working for myself anymore. I was working to prove something. 3 years into our partnership with Frank, Harvest Table had transformed completely. We'd earned our first local dining award, expanded to a second dining room, and doubled our staff. Our revenue had increased by 175%, and the restaurant was now mentioned in Portland tourism guides. Frank approached me on a quiet Monday morning, earlier than our 5-year agreement had specified. "I'm done, Nathan," he said, not unkindly. "My wife wants to travel while our knees still work. I'm ready to sell you the remaining 60%. The timing couldn't have been worse. We'd just started to enjoy a bit of financial breathing room. Taking on more debt would set us back again, but opportunities don't always arrive when convenient. Rebecca and I stayed up all night discussing the options, the risks, the potential. By morning, we had our answer. We would find a way. The bank declined our initial loan application. Apparently, despite our success, restaurants were still considered high-risk investments. We approached 3 more lenders with the same result. I was nearly ready to concede defeat when Rebecca suggested something unexpected. "What about Marcus?" she asked. Marcus Williams was a regular customer who had become something of a friend over the years. He was a successful real estate developer who often brought clients to the restaurant. I'd noticed him taking more interest in our operation lately, asking questions about our suppliers and processes. I approached him cautiously during his next visit, asking if he'd be willing to review our business plan. 3 days later, he called with a proposition. He would finance the remaining purchase with one condition. We would partner on a second location in the Pearl District, an up-and-coming neighborhood in Portland. It was more than I'd hoped for. The deal came together within weeks, and suddenly I wasn't just a part owner of Harvest Table. I was on track to create a restaurant group. When we signed the final papers, Marcus shook my hand and said something I'll never forget. "I've eaten at restaurants all over the world. What you create in that kitchen isn't just food. It's an experience. That's worth investing in." The expansion happened quickly. Harvest Table continued to thrive under my executive chef while I focused on launching our new concept, Ember and Vine, in the Pearl District. The location was prime, the concept was distinctive, and the timing was perfect as Portland's culinary scene gained national attention. 6 months after opening, Ember and Vine was featured in Food and Wine magazine. Overnight, we went from local favorite to destination restaurant. Reservations were booked 3 months in advance. Food critics from Seattle and San Francisco made special trips. And then came the phone call that changed everything. "Nathan, Cooper?" The voice was unfamiliar. "This is James Harlow from the West Coast Culinary Foundation. I wanted to speak with you about your nomination for Rising Star Chef of the Year." I nearly dropped the phone. The award was prestigious, usually reserved for chefs working in major metropolitan areas like Los Angeles or San Francisco. The nomination alone would put both restaurants on the national map. When I told Rebecca that night, she cried not just for the nomination, but for the validation of all our sacrifices. "We need to celebrate," she insisted. "Something special." And the idea came to us simultaneously. For years, we'd watched listing prices on coastal properties, window shopping a dream that seemed impossibly distant. But now, with the success of both restaurants and the attention from the nomination, our financial landscape had changed dramatically. Maybe it was time to revisit that dream. We drove to Cannon Beach the following weekend, the same area where Rebecca's family rented their summer home each year. It was a long shot. Beachfront property that was among the most expensive in Oregon, but we'd scheduled meetings with a real estate agent just to explore possibilities. The third property she showed us took our breath away. A modest but beautiful house perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, with steps leading down to a private stretch of beach. It was at the edge of what we could conceivably afford with creative financing and leveraging our business assets. The previous owners were retiring to Arizona and motivated to sell quickly. "It's a stretch," I admitted as we stood on the deck, watching waves crash against the shoreline. Rebecca leaned against the railing, her hair blowing in the salt breeze. "We've been stretching for 7 years," she said. "What's a little more?" We made an offer that afternoon. After a brief negotiation, it was accepted. 2 months of paperwork, inspections, and financial gymnastics followed, but finally the house was ours. We decided not to tell Rebecca's family immediately. Instead, we invited them to see a property we were considering during their annual summer trip to the coast. Richard and Elaine arrived in their luxury SUV, expressions already skeptical as they pulled into the driveway. "You're looking at this?" Richard asked, eyebrows raised as he took in the spectacular view. "It's certainly ambitious." I handed Rebecca the keys, letting her do the honors. "Actually," she said, sliding the key into the lock, "we're not looking. We closed last week." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in 7 years of knowing the Masons. Elaine's mouth opened and closed without sound. Richard stood frozen, his usual confidence replaced by genuine shock. "This is yours?" he finally managed. "Ours," I confirmed, putting my arm around Rebecca. "We got a good deal. The restaurant group is doing well, and the nomination brought in some investor interest. We gave them a tour of the property, explaining our plans for minor renovations. Throughout the walkthrough, Richard remained uncharacteristically silent, while Elaine asked practical questions about insurance and property taxes. It wasn't until we were all standing on the deck with glasses of champagne that Richard finally addressed what we'd accomplished. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, looking not at me, but out at the ocean. "About both of you." It wasn't an effusive apology or a dramatic reconciliation. It was simply an acknowledgement of reality. We had built something substantial through our own efforts, our own vision. In the Mason family, results spoke louder than words, and the results were undeniable. Later that evening, after they'd left, Rebecca and I sat on our deck, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. The journey that had brought us here, the doubts, the sacrifices, the long hours, the tight budgets, seemed both distant and essential, like a difficult road that led to exactly where we were meant to be. "Do you think they finally get it?" Rebecca asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "I'm not sure it matters anymore," I replied, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. I stopped needing their approval somewhere along the way. The nomination ceremony for Rising Star Chef came 2 weeks later. Rebecca and her parents sat at my table as my name was called. I didn't win. That honor went to a brilliant chef from Seattle. But being recognized among such company was victory. Enough! As we mingled at the reception afterward, I noticed Richard speaking animatedly with Marcus, our investor, gesturing occasionally in my direction. Later, Marcus approached with a smile. "Your father-in-law is quite the businessman," he said. "He's interested in investing in our next venture." I laughed, genuinely surprised. I thought he considered restaurants a graveyard of broken dreams. Marcus shrugged. success has a way of changing perspectives. The following Sunday, Richard and Elaine invited us to dinner at their home, a rarity as they usually preferred restaurants. As Richard carved the roast, he cleared his throat with uncharacteristic awkwardness. "I've been thinking," he began, "about your next restaurant concept, the fast casual version of Ember and Vine you mentioned. I might know some potential locations that would be suitable." It wasn't an apology. It was something more meaningful, an acceptance, an acknowledgement that my path, though different from what he'd envisioned, had merit. It was a business conversation between equals, not a lecture from superior to inferior. As Rebecca and I drove home that night, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I think they're actually proud now. They just don't know how to say it." 5 years have passed since we bought the beach house. Our restaurant group now includes 4 successful concepts across Portland and Seattle. Rebecca has cut back on teaching to focus on our non-profit, which provides culinary training for disadvantaged youth. The beach house has become our sanctuary, the place where we reset, reconnect, and remember the journey. Last month, Richard and Elaine came for dinner at Ember and Vine. After the meal, Richard pulled me aside. "Nathan," he said, swirling his scotch, just as he had during that first uncomfortable dinner, "I've been meaning to tell you something. That day at the beach house, when you showed us what you'd built." He paused, uncharacteristically searching for words. It was the first time I understood what Rebecca saw in you all those years ago. I could have pointed out that it had taken material success for him to see my value. I could have reminded him of all the disparaging comments, the doubts, the judgment. Instead, I simply nodded. "Better late than never," I said, and clinked my glass against his. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong. It's building something so right that even the doubters can't deny its value. The silent satisfaction as they tour your beachfront property is just a bonus. As Rebecca and I fall asleep, to the sound of waves crashing against our shoreline, I sometimes think about that version of me from 7 years ago, determined but uncertain, promising to be worthy of her faith. I wish I could tell him that not only would he keep that promise, but he would exceed it in ways he couldn't imagine. That's the thing about dreams and doubters. The dreams don't have to convince the doubters of anything. The dreams just have to be real to you, substantial enough to build upon, day after day, until they become reality. And then one day, you're handing someone the keys to that reality, watching their silence speak volumes. The apartment Rebecca and I shared felt smaller each day. It wasn't just the physical space, a one-bedroom walk-up above Marty's corner store with perpetually flickering hallway lights and a shower that ran cold after 7 minutes. It was the growing gap between our living situation and our aspirations. Each night, I'd return home smelling of kitchen grease and spices, sometimes after midnight, to find Rebecca asleep surrounded by student essays she'd been grading. The guilt weighed on me. She deserved better than this. I never voiced these doubts to her, but Rebecca had an uncanny ability to read my thoughts. One evening, as I stared at our bank statement at the kitchen table, the balance hovering dangerously, close to 3 digits, she sat across from me and took my hand. "Stop it," she said firmly. "Stop what?" "Thinking that you're failing me somehow." Her green eyes held mine steadily. "This is temporary. We're building something together." It was what I needed to hear, but Richard's words from our last family dinner still echoed. Cooking is a hobby, not a career path. The comment had burned not just because it dismissed my passion, but because deep down, in my darkest moments of doubt, I wondered if he might be right. Portland had a cutthroat restaurant scene. Talented chefs were working as line cooks well into their 40s, still waiting for their break. The next morning, I arrived at Harvest Table 2 hours before my shift. The restaurant occupied a converted Victorian house in a neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying, but still rough around the edges. The deep burgundy walls and mismatched furniture had charm, but needed updating. Frank, the owner, was content with the modest profits the place generated, but I saw untapped potential. I began prepping for the day, but my mind was elsewhere, calculating and recalculating how long it would take, at our current pace, to save enough for even a modest house. The numbers were discouraging. At 35, I had expected to be further along. The kitchen door swung open and Frank shuffled in, his grey hair disheveled as usual. He watched me silently for a moment as I chopped herbs with practiced precision. "You're here early," he finally said, pouring himself coffee from yesterday's pot without bothering to brew fresh. "Testing a new dish for the weekend special." It was partly true. I had been experimenting with a wild mushroom risotto using foraged chanterelles from a supplier I'd discovered at the farmer's market. Frank nodded, then lowered himself onto a stool with a grunt. At 68, his joints protested most movements. "Been meaning to talk to you," he said, staring into his coffee. "Business is down again this quarter." My stomach tightened. In Portland's competitive restaurant landscape, down often preceded closed. I'd witnessed too many promising places shutter their doors. "I have some ideas," I said quickly. "We could update the menu seasonally instead of annually, focus more on local suppliers. The farm-to-table movement is gaining traction, and our space would be perfect for—" Frank held up a weathered hand. "Hold on, I didn't say I was closing." He took a long sip of coffee. "Actually, I'm wondering if you'd be interested in taking a more significant role." I set down my knife. "I'm listening." "Look, Nathan, I'm too old to reinvent this place. Been doing the same thing for 20 years. But you're right, we need changes to survive." He rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "What would you do if this was your restaurant?" The question caught me off guard. I daydreamed about this, of course, but never expected Frank to ask. I chose my words carefully. I'd start with the menu, streamline it, focus on what we do best, but elevate the presentation. Replace the freezer-to-fryer appetizers with house-made charcuterie. Switch to local grass-fed beef. Build relationships with nearby farms. The ideas flowed faster now. Renovate the back dining room into a private event space for wine dinners. Upgrade the wine list. We're in Oregon wine country, but our selection doesn't reflect it. I expected Frank to balk at the implied costs, but he just nodded slowly. "And you think that would bring in more business?" "I know it would. Portland diners are becoming more sophisticated. They want an experience, not just a meal." Frank drained his coffee and stood with another grunt. "Well, I've been thinking about slowing down anyway. The wife wants to spend winters in Arizona." He fixed me with an appraising look. "How would you feel about a trial run? You implement some of these ideas, and if revenue improves, we discuss partnership." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Partnership? Don't get ahead of yourself." Frank cautioned. "Start with the menu changes. We'll reassess in 3 months. After he left, I stood motionless in the kitchen, knife forgotten on the cutting board. Partnership at Harvest Table would mean stability, creative control, equity in something tangible. It would mean proving Richard wrong. Most importantly, it would mean giving Rebecca the life she deserved without compromising my passion. That night, I laid out Frank's proposal to Rebecca over a late dinner of pasta with sauce from a jar, a chef's home cooking irony. Her eyes widened as I explained the opportunity. "Nathan, this is huge," she exclaimed. "Partnership could lead to ownership someday." "If the changes work," I cautioned. "It's still a big if." "They'll work," she said with absolute certainty. "I've tasted what you can do with quality ingredients. Frank would be lucky to have you as a partner." Her confidence warmed me, but reality tempered my excitement. "The changes I want to make will require investment. We'd need to dip into our savings, the house fund. Rebecca didn't hesitate. Do it. This is more important than a down payment right now. This is your future, our future. I kissed her then, overwhelmed with gratitude for her unwavering support. It contrasted sharply with her family's skepticism about my career choice. Rebecca's sister Vanessa had recently commented during Sunday dinner, "At least teachers have pension plans," as if financial security were the only measure of success. The next day, I began drafting the new menu. I spent weeks visiting local farms, meeting with wine distributors, and testing recipes. I maxed out our credit card buying new plates and glassware that would elevate the presentation. Rebecca didn't question a single expense, even when I came home with a $700 Japanese chef's knife that I justified as essential for the level of precision we're aiming for. Frank watched these changes with wary interest, but didn't interfere. "Your show, your consequences," was all he said when I proposed replacing the laminated menus with handwritten daily specials on quality paper. The renovations to the back dining room, now rebranded as The Cellar, took longer than expected and cost nearly double my initial estimate. We drained our modest savings account and postponed paying the electric bill to cover the final expenses. The night before our soft relaunch, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with doubt. What if Richard was right? What if I was gambling our financial security on a passion project doomed to fail? Rebecca found me sitting on our tiny balcony at 3 a.m., staring at the convenience store sign below. "Second thoughts?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around both our shoulders. "Terrified thoughts," I admitted. "We've put everything into this." She leaned against me. "Remember our third date? You made that duck confit that took 3 days to prepare." I smiled at the memory. "You said it was the best thing you'd ever tasted." It was. But what impressed me more was watching you in the kitchen. You were so completely in your element, focused, confident, creative. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you were extraordinary at something you loved. Do you know how rare that is? She turned to face me. Most people spend their lives doing work they tolerate to buy things they don't need. You've found your purpose. That's worth the risk. The relaunch exceeded even my optimistic projections. Word spread quickly about Harvest Table's transformation. The Portland Mercury ran a feature titled "Old Space, New Vision" that praised our commitment to local sourcing and the understated elegance of our revamped interior. Reservations, once unnecessary at Harvest Table, became essential for weekend dining. Frank's demeanor shifted from skeptical to impressed as the numbers climbed steadily over the next 2 months. Regular customers who initially complained about the disappearance of their favorite deep-fried appetizers were won over by house-cured salmon and truffle-infused deviled eggs. The wine dinners in the cellar sold out weeks in advance. At the 3-month mark, Frank called me into his office, a converted pantry barely large enough for his desk and 2 chairs. He spread several papers before me, profit and loss statements, reservation numbers, and staff costs. "Revenue's up 38%, he said without preamble. "Food costs are higher, but margins are better because we're selling more wine." He shuffled the papers. "You've proven your point." I waited, hardly daring to breathe. Frank leaned back in his chair. "My accountant drew up partnership papers, 20% equity to start, with an option to purchase another 20%. In 2 years, if performance continues." He slid a document toward me. "Take it home, review it with your wife or a lawyer if you want." The opportunity I'd been working toward for years was finally tangible, resting on Frank's cluttered desk. But as I scanned the first page, my excitement wavered. The buy-in amount was significant, more than we could afford without a loan. Even with our increased income from the restaurant's success, the monthly payments would strain our budget for years. "It's a lot of money," Frank acknowledged, reading my expression, "but it's fair market value for a profitable business." "I'll need to secure financing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Frank nodded. Take your time, opportunity's not going anywhere. That night, Rebecca and I sat at our kitchen table, calculator in hand, running the numbers over and over. We could make it work, she insisted. If we continue living frugally for another year or two, it would mean postponing the house. Indefinitely, I said. Probably children, too. Rebecca went quiet, twisting her wedding ring, a modest band that I'd promised to upgrade someday. I knew she wanted children. We'd discussed starting a family once we had more stability, more space. Taking on significant debt for the partnership would delay those plans further. What about your parents? I suggested reluctantly. Maybe they'd consider a loan. I hated the idea of asking Richard for money, especially after years of enduring. His thinly veiled disapproval, but pragmatism was overriding pride. Rebecca's expression told me everything. Dad would use it to control you, she said gently. Every business decision would come with his opinion attached. You know that. She was right. Richard would view a loan as purchasing influence over my career choices, and by extension our life decisions. The strings attached would strangle any sense of independence. There must be another way, I said, more to myself than to Rebecca. The solution came from an unexpected source. Martin Chen, a regular customer who had become something of a friend, was a retired venture capitalist who appreciated fine dining. After particularly enjoying a 5-course tasting menu, he lingered after closing, chatting with me about the restaurant's evolution. Frank tells me you're looking at partnership, Martin said casually, swirling the remains of an excellent Oregon Pinot Noir in his glass. I was surprised Frank had shared that information, but nodded. Trying to figure out the financing. Martin set down his glass. Traditional banks don't understand the restaurant business. They see the failure statistics and run screaming. He pulled a business card from his wallet. Call my associate at First Meridian Credit Union. Tell her I sent you. They have a small business program specifically for established local businesses with proven management. The following week, I sat across from Diane Watkins at First Meridian, feeling oddly formal in my one suit, purchased for a cousin's wedding 3 years earlier and slightly too tight across the shoulders. I'd brought comprehensive documentation, harvest tables, financial statements, before and after my changes, projected earnings, personal financial records, and a detailed business plan for future growth. Diane reviewed the materials with practiced efficiency. Martin speaks highly of your culinary skills, she said, not looking up from the documents. Says you've transformed Harvest Table. The restaurant had good bones, I said. It just needed updating to match Portland's evolving food scene. She made a non-committal sound and continued reading. After what felt like hours but was probably 15 minutes, she closed the folder and looked at me directly. Your personal financials aren't stellar, she said bluntly. Limited savings, moderate credit card debt, no significant assets. My heart sank. This was exactly why traditional banks wouldn't touch restaurant financing. However, she continued, the business financials tell a different story. 38% revenue increase in 3 months is impressive by any standard. She tapped the folder. Martin doesn't vouch for people lightly, and your business plan shows you understand both the creative and operational sides of restaurant management. She named a loan amount that would cover the partnership buy-in with a small cushion for additional improvements. The interest rate was higher than a conventional mortgage, but lower than I'd feared. I left the credit union with preliminary approval pending final underwriting. That evening, Rebecca and I celebrated with cheap champagne on our balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky above the convenience store sign. To partnership, she said, clinking her glass against mine. To us, I corrected. None of this would be possible without you believing in me when everyone else saw a glorified cook. The loan closed 3 weeks later, and I signed the partnership agreement with Frank on a Tuesday morning before prep began. There was no ceremony to it, just two signatures on legal documents, a handshake, and Frank saying gruffly, "Don't make me regret this." That night, I called Rebecca's parents to share the news. I hadn't planned to. Pride suggested letting them discover my success organically, but Rebecca insisted they should hear it directly from us. The call went to voicemail. Richard called back the next day while I was at work. "Partnership sounds impressive," he said after I explained the development. "What percentage?" 20% to start, I said, already bristling at his tone, with an option for another 20 in 2 years. "So you've taken on debt to purchase a minority stake in a local restaurant," he summarized, making it sound like I'd invested in a failing carnival attraction. "Interesting strategy." I bit back a defensive response. "The restaurant's performance speaks for itself. Revenue is up significantly, and we're booked solid 6 weeks out for weekend dinners." "Well, I hope it works out," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of doubt. "The restaurant business is notoriously volatile." After we hung up, I stood in the walk-in cooler for several minutes, letting the cold air calm my frustration. Richard's reaction was exactly what I'd expected, yet it still stung. What would it take to earn his respect, or at least his acknowledgement that my career choice was valid? I channeled that frustration into the restaurant. Over the next 18 months, Harvest Table continued its transformation. We expanded the kitchen, hired 2 sous chefs to execute my vision, and launched a Sunday brunch service that became an instant hit. Portland Monthly included us in their Rising Stars issue, featuring a full-page photo of me plating our signature dish, a deconstructed cioppino that showcased local seafood. Frank watched our success with a mixture of pride and amusement. "Never thought the old place had this much life in it," he commented as we reviewed another month of record sales. Rebecca and I were finally able to move from our apartment above the convenience store to a modest rental house in southeast Portland. It had a small yard where Rebecca planted herbs for the restaurant and a kitchen with enough space for me to properly cook at home. We still weren't saving much. Most profits were reinvested in the restaurant, but our quality of life had improved dramatically. On our 5th wedding anniversary, Rebecca presented me with an unexpected gift: a business plan. "What's this?" I asked, opening the professionally bound document. "My vision for the next phase," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "I've been thinking about how to leverage what you've built at Harvest Table." The plan detailed a concept for a second location, not a duplicate of Harvest Table, but a complementary concept focused on casual lunch service in the bustling downtown business district. The financial projections were thorough, including staffing requirements, equipment costs, and potential locations with lease estimates. "Rebecca, this is incredibly detailed," I said, amazed at the work she'd put into it. "But expanding now would be risky. We're just starting to feel financially secure." "That's why the timing is perfect," she argued. "Harvest Table has name recognition now. You've established a brand that could support a second concept." Her eyes shone with conviction. "Nathan, you're meant for more than being a partial owner of one restaurant. You should be building a restaurant group." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Expansion meant increased complexity, additional staff, more financial exposure, but it also meant growth, creative opportunities, and potentially greater financial rewards. "Your father would say we're overreaching," I said, only half joking. Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. "My father measures success by his standards, not ours. Besides," she added with a smile, "proving him wrong has worked out pretty well so far." I studied the business plan more carefully. Rebecca had identified a genuine opportunity in the market: quick, high-quality lunches for professionals who were tired of chain options, but couldn't commit to full-service dining during their workday. The startup costs were significant, but not insurmountable, especially if we could secure the right location. "We should talk to Frank," I said finally. "See if he's interested in being part of this expansion." Rebecca's plan didn't just sit on a shelf. It became our roadmap. Frank declined to participate in the new venture, preferring to focus on Harvest Table, but he supported my involvement as long as I maintained my responsibilities at the original location. "Just don't spread yourself too thin," he cautioned. The search for the perfect location took months. Commercial real estate in downtown Portland was expensive and competitive. We toured spaces that were too small, too large, or needed prohibitively expensive renovations. Just as we were considering adjusting our target area, a real estate agent called about a recently vacated space in the Morgan Building, a historic property in the heart of downtown. The moment we walked in, I knew it was right. High ceilings, large windows facing the street, and a layout that would require minimal structural changes. The rent was at the upper end of our budget, but the location justified the cost. The business loan process was easier this time. Harvest Tables continued. Success, and my track record as a partner, gave lenders confidence. Diane at First Meridian approved our application with a congratulatory note. From minority partner to expanding entrepreneur in 18 months. Impressive trajectory. We named the new restaurant Provisions, a fast casual concept serving elevated sandwiches, salads, and soups made with the same locally sourced ingredients that had put Harvest Table on the map. The interior design balanced efficiency with warmth, reclaimed wood counters, industrial lighting, and walls showcasing local artists. The weeks leading up to opening were a blur of activity. I divided my time between Harvest Table and Provisions, often working 16-hour days. Rebecca handled the administrative side while continuing her teaching job, coming to the new restaurant after school to help with setup. We hired a talented sous chef named Miguel to manage daily operations at Provisions, allowing me to focus on menu development and dividing my time between both locations. Opening day at Provisions arrived with unexpected complications. The espresso machine, a gleaming Italian import that cost more than my first car, refused to maintain proper pressure. The point-of-sale system crashed 20 minutes before doors opened, and our bread delivery arrived with half the order missing, sending Miguel scrambling to a nearby bakery for emergency supplies. Through it all, Rebecca remained calm, handling customer questions while I troubleshot kitchen issues. By noon, a line stretched out the door and down the block. Portland's downtown workforce, curious about the new eatery, arrived in waves. "We're in the weeds," Miguel warned as tickets piled up. The kitchen, designed for efficiency, wasn't prepared for the volume. We'd anticipated a gradual build, not an opening day tsunami. 86 the short rib sandwich, I decided, eliminating our most time-consuming item, and double the prep on turkey avocado. We adjusted in real time, streamlining the menu and reconfiguring stations. Rebecca jumped behind the counter, expediting orders with natural efficiency. By the time the lunch rush ended, we'd served over 200 customers, double our projected opening day count. "We survived," I said, collapsing onto a stool after the last customer left. My chef's coat was stained with various sauces, and a small burn on my wrist throbbed. "We more than survived," Rebecca corrected, showing me the day's sales report. "We sold out of almost everything." The next day brought similar crowds, and the day after that. Word spread quickly about Provisions' quality and convenience. The local business journal featured us in an article about the revitalization of downtown lunch options. Food bloggers posted photos of our signature maple-glazed pork belly sandwich with fennel slaw, creating Instagram-worthy buzz. What we hadn't anticipated was the operational complexity of running two distinct restaurants. Harvest Table required my presence for dinner service, while Provisions demanded attention during lunch. I found myself racing across town multiple times daily, delegating more to my staff out of necessity rather than choice. Despite the exhaustion, watching both restaurants thrive filled me with a sense of accomplishment I'd never experienced. We were building something substantial, something with permanence. Each satisfied customer, each positive review, each staff member who developed under our guidance, all of it validated the path we'd chosen. 6 months after provisions opened, an envelope arrived at our home addressed to both Rebecca and me. Inside was an invitation to the annual Portland Culinary Excellence Award ceremony, where Harvest Table was nominated for Best Restaurant Transformation, and I was personally nominated for Chef Entrepreneur of the Year. Rebecca clutched the invitation, beaming. "Nathan, this is huge. These nominations are citywide recognition." My immediate thought was practical. The ceremony's on a Friday night. We'd need to find coverage at Harvest Table. She gave me a look that mixed exasperation with affection. "Your first restaurant is nominated for a major award, and you're worried about the schedule? We're going. The staff can handle one night." The award ceremony was held at the Portland Art Museum, a venue that intimidated me despite my growing professional confidence. Portland's entire culinary elite would be present, chefs I'd admired for years, restaurateurs with multiple successful concepts, food critics whose words could make or break establishments. "We should invite your parents," I suggested, surprising myself. "They should see this." Rebecca hesitated. "Are you sure? Dad will probably find some way to minimize it." "Let him try," I said with newfound confidence. "These nominations speak for themselves." The night of the ceremony, Rebecca looked stunning in a midnight blue dress she'd splurged on for the occasion. I wore a new suit, my first properly tailored one, that she'd insisted on despite the cost. "You're not walking into that room feeling like you don't belong," she'd declared during the final fitting. Richard and Elaine met us in the museum lobby. Richard, impeccable in a tuxedo that probably cost more than our monthly rent, eyed the crowd with the assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating the worth of gatherings. "Quite the event," he commented, "bigger than I expected." Coming from Richard, it was practically effusive praise. Elaine kissed Rebecca's cheek, then mine, a first in our relationship. "You both look wonderful," she said, sounding almost surprised. During the pre-ceremony reception, I watched Richard's perception shift as several prominent chefs approached to congratulate me on the nominations. Portland's culinary community was tight-knit, and my work at both restaurants had earned respect. From peers, each introduction, each conversation where industry veterans treated me as an equal, added subtle but noticeable tension to Richard's posture. When we were seated for dinner, Elaine turned to me with genuine curiosity. "Nathan, Rebecca tells us Provisions has been quite successful. Are you planning additional locations?" The question wasn't loaded with her usual skepticism. It felt like a legitimate business inquiry, as one might ask a peer. "We're considering it," I replied. "Downtown Vancouver might be next, across the river but still within the Portland metro area. Different demographic, less competition." Richard, overhearing, joined the conversation. "Expanding too quickly is a common error in retail concepts. Better to perfect one location before diluting your oversight." His tone was advisory rather than dismissive, a subtle but significant shift. "We're aware of the risks," I responded. "That's why we're taking a measured approach, first proving the concept works downtown, then expanding strategically rather than rapidly." Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. For perhaps the first time, we were having a genuine business conversation without undertones of disapproval. Harvest Table didn't win Best Restaurant Transformation. That honor went to a former fast food location, converted into an upscale farm-to-table concept. But when they announced Chef Entrepreneur of the Year, my name echoed through The museum hall. Rebecca squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. The walk to the stage felt surreal, as if happening to someone else. Standing at the podium, lights bright in my eyes, I found myself uncharacteristically speechless for a moment. 7 years ago, I finally began. I was a line cook with ambition but no clear path. The difference between then and now isn't just hard work, though there's been plenty of that. It's having people who believe in your vision when it's still just an idea. I looked directly at Rebecca. My wife never once doubted, even when I doubted myself. She saw potential where others saw risk. My gaze shifted briefly to Richard and Elaine, and sometimes the people who challenge you the most ultimately push you toward greater success. After the ceremony, as we gathered in the lobby preparing to leave, Richard pulled me aside. "That was a gracious speech," he said, his tone measured. "Thank you," I replied, awaiting the qualifier that typically followed his rare compliments. Instead, he extended his hand. "You've built something meaningful, Nathan. It's not the path I would have chosen, but it's clearly the right one for you." The acknowledgement so long sought after felt both vindicating and oddly deflating. I'd spent years seeking Richard's approval, and now that I'd received even this modest version, I realized how much of my drive had been fueled by proving him wrong. The handshake between us marked a subtle shift in our dynamic. Not warm acceptance, but professional respect. The award accelerated our reputation within Portland's restaurant scene. Local media coverage increased, and both restaurants consistently operated at capacity. Miguel's management of Provision's daily operations allowed me to focus on expansion planning, menu development, and maintaining quality across both locations. Rebecca and I finally felt financially secure enough to consider buying a home. Portland's real estate market had exploded, making even modest properties in desirable neighborhoods increasingly unaffordable. But our combined income now qualified us for reasonable mortgage options. We spent weekends touring open houses, gradually expanding our search area as reality tempered our expectations. The process was both exciting and sobering. Our dream of a classic craftsman near the city center gave way to more practical options in outer neighborhoods. "What about this area?" our realtor suggested one Sunday, directing us to a neighborhood in northeast Portland that was still transitioning. "You get more house for your money, and property values are projected to increase significantly over the next 5 years." The house she showed us needed cosmetic updates, but had good bones. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with raised garden beds, and most importantly, a kitchen with potential. The price was at the upper end of our budget, but manageable with our current income. "It's not exactly what we pictured," Rebecca admitted as we toured the space. "Neither was my career," I replied, "but that worked out pretty well." We made an offer that evening. After a brief negotiation, the seller accepted, and suddenly we were homeowners. The gravity of the achievement, something Richard had implied, I'd never provide for Rebecca, wasn't lost on either of us. "We should have your parents over for dinner once we're settled," I suggested, while signing the mountain of closing documents. "Show them what we've accomplished." Rebecca looked skeptical. "Are you sure? Mom will immediately start planning renovations we can't afford, and Dad will calculate the appreciation potential." "Let them," I said with newfound confidence. "This is our home, bought with our success. They can critique all they want." The dinner happened 3 weeks after we moved in. Rebecca spent days preparing, not just cleaning and organizing, but strategically placing photos of our restaurants, framing my Chef Entrepreneur Award, and arranging copies of publications that had featured our businesses on the coffee table. "Subtle," I teased, watching her position Portland Monthly, so the feature on Harvest Table was clearly visible. "It's not for us," she replied unapologetically. "It's for them. Sometimes my parents need visual aids to see what's right in front of them." I prepared a multi-course meal, showcasing techniques and flavors from both restaurants. a tasting menu designed to impress without seeming like I was trying too hard. Richard and Elaine arrived precisely on time, bearing an expensive bottle of wine and a houseplant. "The place has character," Elaine commented, her gaze lingering on the living room's outdated light fixture we hadn't yet replaced. "We're making changes gradually," Rebecca explained. "The important thing was getting into the market." Richard nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Portland real estate has appreciated 12% year over year. This neighborhood is undervalued compared to surrounding areas." Coming from Richard, this was high praise, an acknowledgement that our financial decision-making was sound. Throughout dinner, the conversation remained surprisingly pleasant. Richard asked detailed questions about our expansion plans, offering perspective without condescension. Elaine complimented the food repeatedly, even requesting recipes. As I served dessert, a deconstructed apple tart with house-made cinnamon ice cream, Richard cleared his throat. "Nathan, Elaine and I have been discussing something we'd like to propose." He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been impressed with what you've accomplished with your restaurants. The award, the recognition, it's clear you've found your market." I braced myself, uncertain where this was heading. "We'd like to invest in your next venture," he continued. "As silent partners, of course. You'd maintain operational control." The offer stunned me into momentary silence. After years of doubting my career choice, Richard was not only acknowledging its legitimacy, but proposing financial participation. Rebecca recovered first. "That's unexpected. What prompted this?" Elaine stepped in. "Your father has always appreciated entrepreneurial success, regardless of the industry. After seeing what you've built, we believe in the concept's potential for growth." I studied Richard's expression, searching for hidden motives. Was this an attempt to gain control, to somehow insert himself into our success story now that it was proven? "We'd need to discuss terms," I said carefully. "I've worked hard to maintain creative and operational independence." Richard nodded. "Understood. We're not looking to interfere with what clearly works. Consider it a vote of confidence, with potential returns, of course." The conversation shifted to potential structures for such an investment, with Richard outlining options with unexpected flexibility. By evening's end, nothing was decided, but the possibility hung between us, representing both opportunity and complication. After they left, Rebecca and I sat in our new living room, processing the evening's unexpected turn. "Well, that was surreal," she said, curling her legs beneath her on the couch. "My father offering to invest in the career he spent years criticizing. It feels like validation," I admitted, "but also like a potential trap." Rebecca considered this. "Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just a smart business decision on his part. You've proven the concept works. Investing now is just good strategy." "Would you be comfortable with them having a financial stake in our future?" I asked. "Depends on the terms," she replied pragmatically. "If it accelerates our growth, without sacrificing control, maybe it makes sense." And she smiled wryly. "Besides, imagine how much it must have cost Dad's pride to make that offer." We decided to continue the conversation with Richard, establishing clear boundaries about involvement while exploring the potential benefits of additional capital. The prospect of faster expansion was appealing, particularly as Vancouver's commercial real estate market showed promising opportunities. The following week, I received an unexpected call from Martin Chen, the retired venture capitalist who had, initially, helped connect us with financing. "Nathan, I hear congratulations are in order, both for the award and the new home," he said without preamble. "I'd like to meet. There's an opportunity we should discuss." 2 days later, we sat at Harvest table after lunch service, the restaurant empty except for staff preparing for dinner. Martin didn't waste time on small talk. "I've been watching your progress," he said, sipping the coffee I'd prepared. 2. Successful concepts, industry recognition, consistent execution. You've proven you can duplicate your success, which is rare in the restaurant business. "We've been fortunate," I replied modestly. Martin waved this away. "Fortune follows competence. I'm part of an investment group focusing on regional restaurant concepts with expansion potential. Your operation fits our criteria." He outlined their proposal: significant capital infusion in exchange for minority equity, with explicit protections for our creative and operational control. The investment would fund multiple new locations simultaneously, accelerating our growth timeline from years to months. "We typically partner with concepts that have hit their stride, but lack capital for rapid expansion," Martin explained. "Your restaurants are there. The question is whether you're ready to scale." The opportunity was exhilarating and terrifying. Expansion at that pace would fundamentally change our business and our lives. More locations meant more staff, more systems, more complexity, and less direct involvement in day-to-day operations for me. "I'd need to consider how this affects our current investment discussions," I said, thinking of Richard's offer. "And, honestly, whether I'm prepared for growth at that pace." Martin nodded, understanding. "The offer remains open for 60 days. Talk it through with Rebecca. This kind of opportunity typically appears once in a career, but timing matters. You need to be ready for it." That evening, Rebecca and I sat on our back porch, the conversation with Martin adding another layer to our already complex decisions about the future. Richard's investment would be simpler, Rebecca analyzed. Probably less money, but fewer strings attached. Martin's group brings experience scaling restaurant concepts, I countered. They could help us avoid common expansion pitfalls. "It comes down to what kind of future we want," Rebecca said, reaching for my hand. "Steady, controlled growth with family involvement, or accelerated expansion with professional investors." Indeed, the weight of the decision pressed on us. Either path represented a significant evolution from our original vision, from struggling to make ends meet to choosing between investment partners for our growing restaurant group. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard, who had dismissed my culinary ambitions as unsustainable, now wanted to invest in their future. As if reading my thoughts, Rebecca smiled. "Remember when Dad asked if cooking was just a hobby? Now he's calculating potential returns on investment." The moment crystallized something for me. My journey had never really been about proving Richard wrong. It had been about proving myself right. The validation I'd sought wasn't his approval, but confirmation of my own vision, my own abilities. We should meet with both, I decided, hear the details, compare terms, then make a decision based on what serves our vision, not our egos. The following week brought meetings with both potential investors. Richard and Elaine presented a straightforward proposal: capital for one new location with option for additional investment in future sites. Their terms were surprisingly fair, with minimal involvement beyond quarterly updates. Martin's investment group offered more capital but wanted accelerated expansion, 4 new locations within 18 months. Their presentation included market analyses, site recommendations, and systems for maintaining quality across multiple venues. The expertise was impressive, but would fundamentally change how I operated. "We believe in the chef-driven concept," their lead partner emphasized, "but scaling requires systematizing what makes your restaurant special. Your creativity becomes the foundation for operations manuals, not daily execution." The truth of this statement resonated uncomfortably. Expansion at that pace would transform my role from chef to brand manager. The kitchens would execute my vision, but wouldn't have my direct oversight. Rebecca and I spent the weekend deliberating, weighing options against our personal and professional goals. The decision became clearer as we articulated what mattered most to us. I became a chef because I love cooking, I said, not because I wanted to manage a restaurant empire. Rapid expansion might be financially rewarding, but would I still be doing what I love? Rebecca nodded understanding. And we've just bought our first home. Do we want to delay starting a family while managing aggressive growth? The path forward clarified. We would accept Richard and Elaine's investment for one additional location, maintaining our measured expansion approach. The decision prioritized work-life balance and creative fulfillment over rapid scaling, values that had drawn me to cooking initially. When we communicated our decision to Richard and Elaine, their response surprised me. Rather than triumph at being chosen over professional investors, they expressed respect for our thoughtful approach. Controlled growth is sustainable, Richard acknowledged. You're building for longevity, not just expansion. The investment documents were signed the following month, officially bringing my once critical in-laws into our business structure. The partnership required adjustment on both sides, Richard occasionally offering unsolicited advice, me learning to consider his input without defensiveness. Our third restaurant, Provisions Vancouver, opened 6 months later across the Columbia River in Washington. The location captured the growing professional population there, who previously had limited, locally owned lunch options. Opening day saw lines similar to our Portland location, validating our market research. With 3 successful restaurants operating, Rebecca and I finally felt secure enough to begin discussing the family we'd postponed during years of building our business. The conversation was both exciting and daunting. Parenthood would require yet another rebalancing of priorities, another evolution of our shared vision. I'd need to step back somewhat from daily operations, Rebecca acknowledged. She had gradually transitioned from teaching to managing our restaurant's administrative functions, at least initially. We have capable teams now, I reminded her. Miguel could take more responsibility for menu development across all locations. The discussion wasn't just practical, but deeply personal. After years of sacrificing for our professional goals, we were finally considering the family we'd always wanted. The timing felt right. Our business was stable, our home established, our partnership with Richard and Elaine functioning better than anticipated. That Sunday, we invited Richard and Elaine for brunch at Harvest Table. The restaurant was closed to the public for staff training, allowing us privacy. I prepared a special menu highlighting seasonal ingredients, while Rebecca arranged mimosas and coffee. As Richard studied the financial reports from Provisions Vancouver, now a standard part of our family gatherings, I exchanged glances with Rebecca. She nodded encouragingly. "We have some news," I began, drawing their attention from the spreadsheets. "We're planning to start a family." Elaine's expression transformed instantly from polite interest to genuine joy. Richard set down the financial papers, his usual composed demeanor softening. "That's wonderful," Elaine said, reaching across the table to squeeze Rebecca's hand. "When?" "We're just starting to try," Rebecca explained, "but we wanted you to know our plans are shifting. The business will remain important, but our focus is expanding." Richard cleared his throat, showing rare emotion. "You've built a strong foundation, professionally and personally. That's an excellent environment for children." Coming from Richard, this was effusive praise. As the conversation continued, touching on practical considerations and excited speculations, I reflected on how far we'd come, not just in our business success, but in our relationship with Rebecca's parents. The journey from dismissive criticism to genuine respect had been gradual but profound. Later, as we walked Richard and Elaine to their car, Richard paused before getting in. "Nathan," he said, his tone uncharacteristically warm, "I may have misjudged the stability of your chosen path. You've proven quite capable of providing in all the ways that matter. The acknowledgement, so long sought after, now felt less like validation and more like recognition of an obvious truth. We had built something valuable together. Restaurants that thrived, a home that welcomed, and now the possibility of a family to share it all with. As their car pulled away, Rebecca leaned against me. "That might be the closest thing to an apology you'll ever get from my father," she said with affectionate exasperation. "It's enough," I replied, realizing I meant it. The need for Richard's approval had diminished as confidence in our own choices had grown. Success hadn't changed our fundamental values, just made room for them to flourish. The pregnancy test sat on our bathroom counter, 2 pink lines clearly visible. Rebecca and I stared at it, hands clasped tightly together, the magnitude of the moment settling over us. After months of trying, it had finally happened. We were going to be parents. The timing was both perfect and terrifying. Our restaurant group was stable but demanding, our home comfortable but not yet fully renovated, our marriage strong but about to face its greatest evolution. "We're really doing this," Rebecca whispered, a mix of wonder and nervousness in her voice. I pulled her close, feeling a surge of protectiveness alongside my own trepidation. "We've tackled everything else together," I reminded her. "This will be our greatest collaboration yet." The news transformed our priorities overnight. Renovation plans for the house accelerated, focusing on the smallest bedroom that would become the nursery. Work schedules were scrutinized for sustainability once the baby arrived. Our expansion plans for a potential 4th restaurant location were temporarily shelved. When we shared the news with Richard and Elaine over dinner at their West Hills home, their reaction exceeded my expectations. Elaine immediately teared up, clasping Rebecca's hands across the table. Even Richard displayed genuine emotion, opening an expensive bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a significant occasion and pouring sparkling cider for Rebecca. "To the next generation," he toasted, his usual reserve softened by authentic joy. Later that evening, as we prepared to leave, Richard took me aside in his study, closing the door for privacy. "Nathan," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "becoming a father changes everything. Your priorities, your perspective, even your understanding of success." He gazed at the family photos arranged on his desk. "I want you to know that, despite our differences over the years, I've come to respect the life you've built with Rebecca. You've provided stability, fulfillment, and now a family." Coming from Richard, this was unprecedented acknowledgement. I nodded, uncertain how to respond to this sudden vulnerability from a man who had spent years questioning my choices. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you might realize." "There's something else," Richard continued, opening his desk drawer. He withdrew a folder and handed it to me. "A gift for my grandchild." Inside was documentation for an education trust fund, already seeded with a substantial amount. The gesture was both generous and meaningful, Richard's way of contributing to our child's future while respecting our independence. "This is incredibly generous," I said, genuinely moved. "It's what grandparents do," Richard replied with a small smile. "Besides, you and Rebecca should focus your resources on your business and home. This is one area where we can help without interfering." The acknowledgement of his previous tendency to overstep was subtle, but clear. Our relationship had evolved from skepticism to respect, and now to something approaching genuine family connection. The transformation felt symbolic of our broader journey, from being viewed as inadequate to being recognized as capable parents and providers. As Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, the practical realities of balancing parenthood with our growing business demanded attention. I hired additional management staff at all 3 restaurant locations, creating a more robust organizational structure that could function without my daily presence. Miguel, who had proven himself invaluable at provisions, was promoted to director of operations, overseeing day-to-day execution across all locations. "You're actually delegating," Rebecca observed with mock surprise as I finalized the new organizational chart. "I never thought I'd see the day." "Necessity is the mother of personal growth," I quipped, though the transition wasn't entirely comfortable. Loosening control over menu execution and daily operations challenged my identity as a hands-on chef. Yet watching capable staff step into expanded roles brought unexpected satisfaction. The restaurants were becoming self-sustaining entities, not just extensions of my personal culinary vision. Financial planning took on new urgency with a child on the way. Rebecca and I met with advisors to establish wills, life insurance, and college savings accounts, the mundane but essential infrastructure of responsible parenthood. The process included reviewing our business structure and succession planning, considerations that would have seemed premature just a year earlier. At 28 weeks, Rebecca developed complications that required reduced activity and increased monitoring. Her doctor recommended she step back from work entirely, necessitating yet another adjustment to our carefully balanced system. I hired a temporary administrative manager and reduced my own hours at the restaurants to support Rebecca at home and attend medical appointments. The situation forced a reckoning with our workaholic tendencies. For years, we'd poured every waking hour into building our business, postponing vacations and limiting social engagements. The pregnancy complications served as a stark reminder that some things, health, family, well-being, couldn't be deferred indefinitely. One evening, as Rebecca rested on our couch with her feet elevated, she voiced the concern that had been growing in both our minds. "We need to change how we operate," she said, one hand resting on her swollen abdomen, "not just temporarily but permanently. We can't run 3 restaurants and be the parents we want to be without fundamentally restructuring our involvement." The truth of her statement resonated deeply. Our current approach was unsustainable with a child. The question wasn't whether to change, but how to do so while preserving what we'd built. "Maybe this is where Richard and Elaine's investment shows its real value," I suggested. "Not just for expansion, but for creating a business that doesn't require our constant presence." The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with our key staff across all locations. Rather than providing directions, I asked for solutions. How could our restaurant group function effectively with significantly reduced involvement from Rebecca and me? The resulting conversation was revelatory, with team members offering insights and suggestions I hadn't considered. Miguel proposed a centralized executive chef position to maintain menu consistency across locations. Our finance manager recommended outsourcing payroll and accounting functions we'd been handling internally. The general manager at Harvest Table suggested rotating senior staff between locations to cross-train and identify best practices. The collaborative problem-solving demonstrated something important. We'd built not just restaurants, but a team capable of innovation and leadership. Our success wasn't solely dependent on our daily involvement, but on the systems and culture we'd established. Implementing these changes required significant investment, both financial and emotional. We increased salaries for key staff taking on expanded responsibilities, upgraded our management software, and established formal training programs to develop future leaders within the organization. The most challenging aspect was psychological, relinquishing control over operations I'd meticulously overseen for years. Each delegation represented both a practical necessity and a personal test. Could I trust others to maintain the standards that had built our reputation? Could the restaurants thrive without my constant presence in the kitchens? As these changes took shape, our focus shifted to preparing our home for the baby's arrival. The nursery project became a welcome creative outlet, allowing me to channel energy into something tangible during this period of professional transition. We painted the walls a gentle sage green, assembled furniture on weekends, and debated the merits of various baby monitors with the same intensity previously reserved for restaurant equipment. Richard and Elaine surprised us by organizing the baby shower, hosting it at their home with unexpected warmth and enthusiasm. Elaine had transformed their formal dining room with tasteful decorations, while Richard somewhat awkwardly but sincerely welcomed guests, mostly restaurant staff and friends, with a few Mason family members in attendance. "You've created quite a community," Richard observed as he watched the gathering, "not just a business." The observation was perceptive. Our restaurants had indeed generated a community, staff who had become friends, regular customers who knew our story, suppliers who had grown alongside us. This network represented a different kind of wealth than Richard had initially envisioned for his daughter, but its value was undeniable. As Rebecca's due date approached, I finalized our parental leave plan. I would take 3 weeks completely away from the restaurants following the birth, then transition to a limited schedule of essential oversight while working primarily from home. The arrangement was made possible by our restructured management team and Richard's increased involvement in financial oversight, a role that suited his skills without impinging on our operational independence. 2 weeks before Rebecca's due date, I received an unexpected email that would present both opportunity and complication. The subject line read simply, "Coastal Property Investment Opportunity." The message was from Thomas Adler, a regular customer at Harvest Table and prominent real estate developer specializing in Oregon coastal properties. He explained that a unique waterfront property in Cannon Beach, one of Oregon's most prestigious coastal towns, had become available through a private sale. The owner, facing health issues, wanted to sell quickly to the right buyer rather than listing publicly. Given your interest in expanding your restaurant concepts and your personal appreciation for the coast, which you've mentioned during our conversations, I thought this might interest you, Thomas wrote. The property includes a residence with spectacular ocean views and a commercial space previously operated as a cafe. Zoning would permit a restaurant operation. Attached were photos of a stunning property perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The house was a modern interpretation of coastal architecture, all glass and weathered cedar with expansive decks. The commercial space below, while modest, featured the same breathtaking views. Under normal circumstances, the opportunity would have been tantalizing but impractical. Cannon Beach property values were among Oregon's highest, typically far beyond our financial reach. Additionally, with a baby imminent and our existing restaurants requiring attention, expansion to a coastal location seemed logistically impossible. Yet something about the timing felt significant. Rebecca and I had often talked about having a coastal retreat someday, a place to escape Portland's urban intensity, a setting to eventually share with our children. The commercial space offered potential future business opportunities without demanding immediate development. I forwarded the email to Rebecca with the subject line, "Probably impossible but worth discussing." Her response came quickly, "Definitely impossible. But I can't stop looking at those photos. Let's talk when you get home." That evening, we sat on our back porch, laptop open to the property images, practicality warring with aspiration. The timing couldn't be worse, I acknowledged. With the baby, the restaurant restructuring, our stretched finances. Completely impractical, Rebecca agreed, then paused. And yet when will an opportunity like this come again? Waterfront property in Cannon Beach, not publicly listed. We calculated scenarios for hours, exploring creative financing options, potential business models for the commercial space, ways to make the impossible possible. By midnight, we'd reached the regretful but realistic conclusion that the opportunity, however appealing, exceeded our current capacity. The next morning, I drafted a polite decline to Thomas, thanking him for thinking of us, but explaining our current focus on family and existing business commitments. Before sending it, however, a thought occurred to me, one that highlighted how much our relationship with Rebecca's parents had evolved. "What if we discuss this with your parents?" I suggested to Rebecca. "Not asking for money," I added quickly, seeing her skeptical expression. "But for perspective, Richard understands real estate investment better than we do." The suggestion would have been unthinkable years earlier, when any financial discussion with Richard invited criticism of my career choice and earning potential. That we could now consider consulting him as a resource rather than a judge of our decisions represented significant growth. Richard and Elaine came for dinner that weekend, ostensibly to deliver additional baby items, but actually to satisfy Elaine's need to check on Rebecca's health. After the meal, while Elaine helped Rebecca organize baby clothes, I showed Richard the coastal property information. "Interesting opportunity," he said, studying the materials with professional assessment. "Cannon Beach is essentially recession-proof real estate. Limited supply, consistent demand, strict development regulations to prevent overdevelopment. It's beyond our reach financially," I acknowledged, "especially now. But I wanted your perspective on whether something like this would be worth pursuing in the future." Richard considered this thoughtfully. Coastal commercial property with residential component is rare, especially with these views. "If you're thinking long-term investment combined with lifestyle value," he paused, studying the numbers again. "Have you explored creative financing options? Partial ownership structures? There are approaches beyond conventional mortgages." The conversation evolved into a detailed discussion of investment strategies I'd never considered, ways to leverage our existing business assets, partnership structures that would allow partial ownership until full acquisition became feasible, tax advantages of certain approaches. Richard's expertise illuminated possibilities that our initial analysis had missed. "I'd be happy to review any offer you're considering," he offered. "No pressure either way, but real estate at this level has complexities worth navigating carefully." And the offer of assistance without judgment felt like the culmination of years of relationship evolution. Richard was offering his expertise as a resource, not using it as a measure of our inadequacy. The shift was profound. That night, Rebecca and I revisited our decision with new perspective. While still daunting, the possibility seemed less impossible with Richard's insights. We drafted a highly conditional offer significantly below asking price, structured with extended closing and creative financing. It was largely symbolic, an acknowledgement of interest rather than a realistic bid, but it kept the conversation open while we focused on Rebecca's impending delivery. To our astonishment, the seller responded with interest in our approach, countering with terms that, while still challenging, moved the possibility from impossible to merely difficult. With Richard's guidance, we refined our offer, establishing a potential path to ownership that would begin with a modest initial investment and grow over time. As these negotiations proceeded in the background, Rebecca's pregnancy reached its dramatic conclusion. Her water broke at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, 2 days before her scheduled induction. The carefully organized hospital bag was grabbed, last-minute texts sent to our management team activating our absence protocol, and we drove through Portland's empty early morning streets toward the hospital. 16 hours later, Emma Catherine Cooper entered the world. 7 pounds, 8 ounces of squirming red-faced perfection. Holding her for the first time recalibrated every priority, every ambition, every measure of success I'd ever held. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not restaurants, not coastal properties, not even the approval I'd sought for so long. Richard and Elaine arrived at the hospital the following morning, bearing flowers and uncharacteristic emotional openness. Watching Richard hold his granddaughter with tender awkwardness, I realized how much our shared journey had transformed us all. The man who had once dismissed my ability to provide adequately for his daughter now stood in awe of the family we had created. "She's perfect," he said simply, any pretense of stoic reserve abandoned. The first weeks of parenthood passed in a blur of sleepless nights, constant adjustments, and overwhelming love. The restaurant team executed our absence plan flawlessly, sending daily updates that required minimal response. Miguel and our enhanced management structure proved their worth, maintaining operations with only occasional guidance. Amid diaper changes and midnight feedings, the coastal property negotiations continued sporadically. Richard reviewed each document, offering insights without pushing us in either direction. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, we received unexpected news. The seller had accepted our structured acquisition proposal. The property could be ours through a complex but viable financing arrangement involving initial partial ownership with a path to full acquisition over 5 years. The decision remained monumentally challenging. Proceeding meant significant financial commitment during an already transformative period. Yet the opportunity aligned with our long-term vision, a coastal presence for both personal enjoyment and potential business expansion, an investment in our family's future. After days of discussion, consultation with financial advisors, and honest assessment of our capacity, we made our decision. We would proceed with the acquisition, understanding the risk but believing in the long-term value for our family and business. The purchase agreement was signed when Emma was 6 weeks old. The terms were structured to allow gradual financial commitment, beginning with a manageable initial investment and increasing as our business stabilized post-expansion. The seller, motivated by health concerns to transition quickly, accepted terms that would have been impossible in a conventional market transaction. When the initial papers were signed, I sent Richard a simple text. "We got it. Thank you for your guidance." His response was equally succinct. "Well done. Smart acquisition." The acknowledgement felt different from the validation I'd once craved. It was professional respect between equals rather than approval from superior to inferior. The evolution reflected our journey, from questioned provider to recognized entrepreneur, from doubted son-in-law to respected family member. Our first visit to the coastal property as partial owners came when Emma was 3 months old. The drive from Portland took just under 2 hours, with a stop halfway for feeding and changing. As we wound along the coastal highway, dense forest suddenly giving way to spectacular ocean views, a sense of achievement settled over me that transcended professional success. The house exceeded even the photographs, perched dramatically on the cliff edge with panoramic views of Haystack Rock and the expansive Pacific. The commercial space below, while needing renovation, offered tantalizing possibilities, perhaps a small seasonal restaurant or a tasting room featuring wines from our Portland restaurant collections. Standing on the deck with Emma bundled against the coastal breeze, Rebecca's arm around my waist, I experienced a moment of clarity. Success wasn't measured by Richard's approval or industry accolades or even financial milestones. It was this: building a life that aligned with our values, creating opportunities for our family, establishing a legacy that extended beyond restaurant reviews or profit margins. "Should we invite your parents out to see it?" I asked, genuinely wanting to share this achievement with them. Rebecca nodded. "They're part of this too now, in a good way." The visit was arranged for the following weekend. Richard and Elaine arrived in their luxury SUV, having insisted on driving separately to give you privacy with the baby afterward. The consideration was characteristic of their evolved approach to our relationship, supportive without overwhelming, involved without controlling. As we gave them the tour, Richard assessed the property with professional appreciation, while Elaine imagined future family gatherings. Their reaction to the commercial space particularly surprised me. "You should take your time deciding how to utilize this," Richard advised, examining the empty cafe space. "The right concept for this location could become a significant asset, but it needs to complement your existing operations without diluting your Portland presence." The council was offered as collaborative thinking rather than directive, another sign of how far we'd come. When we reached the main deck overlooking the ocean, Richard handed me a bottle of champagne he'd brought for the occasion. "To new horizons," he toasted after I'd poured glasses for everyone except Rebecca, who was nursing, "and to proving me wonderfully wrong about what's possible." The acknowledgement, offered without prompting, represented the culmination of years of unspoken tension. Richard wasn't just recognizing our achievement, but his own misjudgment, a rare concession from a man accustomed to being right. "I was wrong to question your path," he continued, uncharacteristically reflective. "You've not only provided for Rebecca and Emma, but created something meaningful in the process. That's success by any measure." The moment wasn't about vindication, but reconciliation, the closing of one chapter and opening of another. As we stood overlooking the ocean, Emma sleeping peacefully in Rebecca's arms, the coastal property represented not just a financial investment, but a symbolic one: belief in our future, confidence in our choices, commitment to the family we were. The building, later, as sunset painted the sky in spectacular oranges and purples, Richard and I stood alone on the deck, while Rebecca showed Elaine the nursery space we'd begin setting up for Emma's visits. "Did you ever doubt," Richard asked quietly, his gaze on the horizon, "that you could make this work?" The question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "Every day," I admitted, "but doubting and quitting are different things." Richard nodded thoughtfully. The doubters, myself included, underestimated that distinction. He turned to face me directly. "Thank you for proving us wrong. My daughter deserved someone who believed in possibilities rather than limitations." In that moment, standing on the deck of a coastal property I once couldn't have imagined owning, with a successful restaurant group and a beautiful family, the approval I'd once desperately sought felt almost incidental. Richard's recognition mattered not because I needed it, but because it represented how far we'd all traveled, from skepticism to respect, from judgment to appreciation, from doubt to shared success. The sound of waves crashing against the shore below provided a fitting soundtrack to this realization. Like water gradually reshaping stone, persistence had transformed not just our circumstances, but our relationships, creating something neither side could have initially envisioned. 5 years have passed since we acquired the coastal property. Emma is now a lively kindergartner who knows her way around a professional kitchen almost as well as the tide pools below our Cannon Beach home. The commercial space that once housed a modest cafe has been transformed into Salt and Vine, a seasonal restaurant showcasing the best of Oregon's coastal bounty, paired with wines from our curated collection. It operates only during summer months, allowing us to maintain our Portland-based operations while creating a coastal presence that complements rather than competes with our established restaurants. Today marks a special milestone. We're hosting a private event at Salt and Vine, celebrating the complete ownership transfer of the Cannon Beach property. The structured acquisition plan that once seemed so daunting has been fulfilled ahead of schedule, thanks to our restaurant group's continued success and strategic growth. The gathering is intimate, our key staff, closest friends, and of course, Richard and Elaine. I watch from the kitchen as Rebecca guides Emma through helping set the tables. Her patient instructions on proper napkin folding met with our daughter's determined concentration. Emma's dark hair, so like her mother's, falls across her face. As she carefully places each fork at a precise angle, her attention to detail reminds me of myself, a recognition that both pleases and terrifies me. Rebecca catches my eye across the room and smiles, the unspoken communication of partners who have weathered challenges together and emerged stronger. The space itself reflects our journey. Rustic, yet refined, local materials blending with contemporary design, the massive windows framing the Pacific Ocean as nature's ever-changing artwork. The Restaurant Industry Awards, displayed discreetly near the entrance, speak to professional accomplishment, but it's the family photos intermixed with them that reveal our true priorities. Richard and Elaine arrive precisely on time, as always. Richard's hair has silvered completely in the past 5 years, while Elaine's remains suspiciously unchanged. Emma abandons her table-setting duties to launch herself at her grandfather, who scoops her up with practiced ease. "Papa, did you bring me something from your trip?" she asks without preamble. Richard and Elaine have recently returned from a month in Europe, a retirement indulgence they've embraced enthusiastically. "Emma," Rebecca chides gently, "that's not how we greet people." Richard laughs, a sound that comes more easily to him now than in years past. "It's quite all right," he assures, setting Emma down to rummage in his leather messenger bag. "As a matter of fact, I did bring something." He produces a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "A little chef's apron I found in Paris. They take their cooking very seriously there, you know." Emma unwraps it with delight, revealing a miniature professional-quality apron with her name embroidered across the chest. The gift is thoughtful and specific to her interests, evidence of how well Richard has come to know his granddaughter and how much he values her budding passion for culinary arts. The moment captures the transformation in our family dynamic. Richard, once dismissive of my culinary career, now encourages similar interests in his granddaughter. The man who questioned whether cooking could provide adequate stability now proudly tells friends that his son-in-law built a restaurant group from scratch. As our guests arrive, Miguel and his family, Frank from Harvest Table with his new wife, other key members of our extended professional family, the atmosphere warms with conversation and laughter. I circulate briefly before retreating to the kitchen to oversee final preparations for the meal I've planned. This dinner is special, not just for the milestone it celebrates, but because I'm cooking personally, something my executive role now allows only on significant occasions. The menu tells our story, appetizers featuring ingredients from farms that supply our Portland restaurants, seafood harvested from waters visible through our windows, wines from Willamette Valley vintners who took chances on our first locations when we were still establishing ourselves. Each course represents a chapter in our journey, from struggle to stability, from doubt to validation, from proving ourselves to celebrating accomplishment. When all guests are seated, I join them briefly before the first course is served. Raising a glass, I find myself searching for words that can adequately express the significance of this gathering. "Thank you all for being here today," I begin. "This milestone isn't just about property ownership or business success. It's about the fulfillment of a vision that many people, some in this room, once questioned." My gaze meets Richard's briefly, with understanding rather than reproach. 5 years ago, when we signed the initial papers for this property, Emma was just a few months old. I was juggling new parenthood with restaurant operations and wondering if we'd taken on too much. The doubts were real, as they should be with any significant decision. Rebecca reaches for my hand under the table, a gesture of solidarity and shared memory. But what I've learned through this journey is that the most meaningful accomplishments often lie just beyond what seems reasonable. The restaurants, this coastal property, our beautiful family, none of it would exist if we'd limited ourselves to what seemed sensible or safe. Richard nods slightly, acknowledgement of a philosophy he once would have criticized as impractical. I'm grateful, not just for those who believed in us from the beginning, but also for those who challenged us to prove ourselves. I raise my glass higher, to possibilities realized, to doubts overcome, and to the journey ahead. The dinner unfolds with the warmth and precision that have become hallmarks of our establishments. Between courses, I observe the interactions around the table. Miguel discussing menu innovations with Frank, Rebecca deep in conversation with Elaine about Emma's education, Richard entertaining Emma with stories from their European travels. The seamless blend of personal and professional relationships reflects the life we've built, one where work and family aren't compartmentalized but integrated in healthy balance. After dessert, as guests move to the deck to enjoy sunset over the Pacific, Richard approaches me with a small package. A token to mark the occasion, he explains, uncharacteristically hesitant. Something I should have given you years ago. Inside the box is a vintage compass, its brass casing patinated with age, its needle still finding true north with unwavering precision. It belonged to my father, Richard explains. He gave it to me when I started my first significant investment. Said every good provider needs to know which direction they're heading. He pauses, searching for words. I didn't give it to you when you and Rebecca married because I didn't believe. Well, that doesn't matter now. You found your direction. Without it. The gesture holds more meaning than any verbal apology or acknowledgement. Richard is not only recognizing my role as provider, but placing me in a lineage of family stewardship. Thank you, I say simply, understanding the significance. I'll give this to Emma when the time is right. Richard nods, emotion briefly visible before his typical reserve returns. You've taught me something important, Nathan. There are many paths to success, and the conventional route isn't always the most fulfilling. What you've built here, his gesture encompasses not just the restaurant, but the larger life we've created, is remarkable precisely because it followed your vision, not others' expectations. As the evening concludes and guests depart, Rebecca, Emma and I walk along the beach below our property. Emma runs ahead, collecting shells and occasionally shouting discoveries back to us. Rebecca leans against me, comfortable silence between us as the day's significance settles. Did you ever imagine this? She asks eventually, gesturing toward our home perched on the cliff above. When Dad was questioning everything about your career choice, I consider the question carefully. Not specifically this, I admit. But I always believed we could build something meaningful together. The details weren't clear, but the direction was. The compass in my pocket seems to weigh more significantly with this realization. My journey wasn't about proving Richard wrong as much as proving ourselves right, demonstrating that success comes in many forms, that providing isn't just about financial security, but about creating a life aligned with core values. Emma returns with a perfectly formed sand dollar, presenting it proudly. For the restaurant, she declares, to remind customers where they are. Her instinctive understanding of creating meaningful experiences, the essence of hospitality, makes me smile. Perhaps she'll continue the legacy we've built, or perhaps she'll forge her own path entirely. Either way, she'll do so knowing that conventional wisdom is just one perspective, not an absolute truth. As the sun sets over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I reflect on the symmetry of our journey. What began as a struggle to prove doubters wrong has transformed into something far more valuable. The wisdom to define success on our own terms and the confidence to pursue it without requiring external validation. The beachfront property that once seemed impossible now stands as tangible proof, not just of financial achievement, but of the power of persistent vision. The silence of those who once doubted speaks volumes, but their respect and recognition, when finally offered, matter less than our own satisfaction in the life we've created. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.